I was 5 years old the Christmas we went camping deep in the bush with a few other families. Back then, it felt like the greatest adventure. There were 9 of us kids in total, some older, some younger, but most of us were around the same age. My parents were good friends with 3 other couples, and every year around Christmas, they'd all pack up their 4-wheel drives and take us into the woods somewhere remote. They liked the kind of camping where you couldn't see anyone else's tent for miles. No roads, no noise, no people. Just the bush, the sounds of birds, and the crackling of the fire at night. That year, we were about 5 or 6 hours from the nearest town. The adults had picked a spot near a river, tucked away behind thick gums and rocks that broke up the sunlight, so the whole place always felt a little dim, even during the middle of the day. We'd set up a big main camp where the adults cooked and hung out, and us kids slept in swags or little tents nearby, in a sort of messy semicircle. The parents were laid back but careful. We were allowed to wander, but not far. Every morning, they'd give us one of the big walkie-talkies, those chunky ones with the long antenna, and tell us to stay within range. "You'll hear us call when lunch is ready," they'd say. "Don't go past the creek." That was the rule. Creek was the edge. Beyond that, it got steeper and thicker with dead branches and tangled undergrowth. You could get lost easily out there. They trusted us to follow the rules. And we did, mostly. We were just kids who liked climbing rocks and throwing sticks in the water. I still remember how hot it was that year. Even though it was Christmas, the sun was brutal by midday. We'd wake up early to beat the heat and then wander through the bush in little groups, picking up sticks, chasing goannas, and making forts out of fallen branches. We'd find patches of shade to sit and eat crackers or dried fruit. And when the walkie crackled to life, we'd know it was time to head back. That's how the days went. Simple, happy, carefree. But then one morning, everything shifted. We'd been out maybe an hour, 4 or 5 of us grouped together, following an old dry creek bed. The walkie crackled, and we paused, expecting to hear one of the parents calling us in. But it wasn't them. It was a man's voice, deep, too smooth, cheerful in a way that didn't sound real. "Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas, kids." We all stared at the walkie. No one spoke. "I'm Santa. I've got presents for all the good boys and girls," the voice continued. "I just need to find you first." We were still frozen. The voice kept talking. "If you come out where I can see you, I'll give you your gifts. Are you near the creek? I think I saw someone in a red shirt." I was wearing a red shirt. I remember the way the older kids looked at each other, half scared, half excited. At 5 years old, I didn't know what to think. I just knew Santa was talking to us. The voice said it again. "Come out, kids. Don't be shy." Then silence. We ran back to camp, full speed, heart pounding, legs tripping over rocks and dry twigs. One of the older boys, maybe 8 or 9, had the walkie in his hand and kept checking it, waiting for it to crackle again. Didn't. Not then. When we got back to camp, we were all yelling at once. Out of breath, excited, confused. "Santa's on the walkie. He saw us. He knew what I was wearing." At first, the parents didn't say much. They didn't smile. They looked at each other, then took the walkie from us. One of the dads, tall guy with a big beard, turned it off right away and said we weren't allowed to use it anymore. We didn't understand. We were kids. It felt like a punishment for something amazing. They told us we had to stay in camp the rest of the trip. No more wandering. No more forts or rock climbing. They said it was too hot, that we should just swim in the river. They didn't want to explain it further. The tone of the trip changed after that. They didn't play music at night like they used to. They kept the fires lower. They moved our tents closer together, too, so close you could hear the adults whispering at night after they thought we were asleep. But I wasn't asleep. Not that night. I remember hearing one of the moms whisper, "It wasn't one of us. That's not funny." And someone else, maybe my dad, muttering, "That wasn't a joke. That guy wasn't joking." Looking back now, I understand what really happened. I can piece it together in ways I couldn't as a kid. We were far out in the bush. We were alone, or at least we thought we were. But someone else was out there. Someone had a walkie tuned to the same frequency. That wasn't hard to do. Those radios weren't encrypted or secure. Anyone with the same model could listen in. The parents had probably given one to each group of kids and kept one or two among themselves, maybe 3 total. But someone else had one too, someone who didn't belong. He'd been listening to us, maybe for days, listening as we called each other, talked about where we were, listening to our parents when they told us lunch was ready, picking up bits and pieces of our voices until he knew who we were and where we played. He had to have been close enough to hear us clearly, close enough to say he saw a red shirt. That meant he'd been watching us, not just listening. He was watching from the bush. After we heard the voice, one of the dads probably tested all the radios, tried to respond, tried to scan for other signals. But the voice never came back. The man never spoke again. Whoever it was, he knew how to disappear. The next morning, I remember waking up early and seeing the dads standing in a small group near the riverbank, talking quietly, scanning the trees. One of them had binoculars. Another had a small axe hanging from his belt. None of them looked relaxed anymore. They didn't say it, but they were on edge. They were watching the woods the way you watch the door when you're alone at night. We left a day early. They packed everything fast, barely spoke while they loaded up the trailers and strapped things down. I remember one of the moms keeping us all close, making us sit in the back of the car instead of helping. She kept checking the mirrors the whole way out of the bush. I don't remember if the police were called. Maybe they were. Maybe one of the dads reported it later when we got back to town. But there wasn't much to say. No name, no location, just a voice. The man never said who he was. He just said he was Santa. Now, decades later, I think about that trip more often than I probably should. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted. But I know enough to be disturbed by it. He wanted to lure kids out from the trees. He used the voice of Santa to do it. Cheerful, harmless, playful. He knew what day it was. He knew it was Christmas. He chose that voice for a reason. He wanted us to trust him. He knew kids would come closer if they thought someone friendly was looking for them. He asked us to come find him. That was the part that always sticks with me. He didn't say he was coming to us. He wanted us to come to him. That means he wasn't just creeping nearby. He was set up somewhere out there, waiting. It was remote country, dense, tangled, easy to hide in. He could have had a small camp just past the creek, past where we were allowed to go. He could have been watching us every day, picking up our patterns, watching the way we'd climb the same rocks, go to the same places, waiting for the right time to speak. And when he did, he used something we loved to trick us. As a kid, I thought we missed out on a fun memory. But as an adult, I know we barely avoided something worse. That voice on the walkie could have easily led one of us deeper into the bush. Some of the kids were older, bold enough to wander off and look for Santa on their own. If they hadn't run back to camp, if they'd split off to go look, they might not have come back at all. None of us knew the seriousness of it until later. I didn't really start to understand until I was in my 20s. I was scrolling through some online forum about weird childhood memories and saw someone else mention a story that sounded too familiar. Another walkie, another remote area, another voice pretending to be someone else. It made me sick to my stomach. That man might have done this before or after. People always think the woods are empty, but they're not. There are people out there. Sometimes they're just hikers, hunters, campers, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're people who know how to disappear into the trees, people who know how to find you without being seen. I think about how close that man must have been, how long he must have listened, how calm his voice was, how he made it sound like a game. I think about how he probably watched us run back to camp. I wonder if he smiled when we ran. I wonder if he thought he could try again. We were lucky. Our parents acted fast. They locked things down. We didn't go off again. But it doesn't escape me that he chose that day, Christmas, to pretend to be someone we loved. It makes my skin crawl. That was the last time we ever camped that deep in the bush. After that, my parents stuck to caravan parks, places with fences, other families, reception. They never said why. They didn't have to. I've always liked the outdoors. Not in an extreme way, not a let's climb Everest and sleep in a snow cave kind of outdoorsy. Just the simple stuff. Local trails, lakes, day hikes. I'd go out on weekends to get some fresh air, maybe take photos, bring a sandwich. Nothing hardcore, just a way to feel quiet for a while. But there's a fine line between enjoying nature and disrespecting it. I didn't understand that line until I crossed it. It started when I met a group of hikers online. Nothing weird, just a local outdoors club. We'd meet up, go on hikes, share photos, that kind of thing. They were good people, mostly experienced. Some had done long treks through national parks. Some were ex-military or ex-park rangers. I was probably the least experienced in the group, but I liked tagging along. One weekend, we planned a hike up a long, forested ridge that led to a fire tower overlook. The trail wasn't on official maps, but a few guys said they'd done it before. I trusted them. The plan was to leave around 4 p.m., reach the tower by sunset, have dinner, then hike down in the dark with headlamps. They said the forest at night was peaceful, that you'd hear owls, feel the breeze through the trees, that the stars were brighter with no city lights nearby. At the time, that sounded cool, magical even. In hindsight, it was probably the dumbest idea I've ever agreed to. We parked at the trailhead, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town, down a gravel road most people would miss if they blinked. It was late October. Dry leaves coated the trail. The air was cool but not cold. I had a decent pack with me. Water, headlamp, jacket, knife, snacks, power bank. I figured I was set. There were 6 of us. We started up the ridge together. The trail was narrow and full of switchbacks, weaving through tall pines and dense underbrush. Early on, it felt like any other hike. I snapped pictures. We joked around. But as we climbed higher and the light started to fade, the forest began to change. Everything got quieter. I didn't notice it at first, but by the time we reached the halfway point, I realized I hadn't heard a single bird in a while. Not even the usual leaf scattering of squirrels. Just the crunch of our boots and the rustle of our breath. The fire tower was a squat metal structure at the top of the ridge, about 40 feet tall. We reached it around 6:30, right as the sun was setting. The view from up there was wild, an endless blanket of trees fading into the horizon. No lights, no buildings, just forest in every direction. We ate, rested, took some photos. Then we started the hike back down. That's when things turned. Not immediately. The first stretch was fine. Everyone had headlamps. The trail was familiar. But then one of the guys said we should take a different path down. Faster, he said. He'd marked it on GPS, said it looped us back to the same parking lot, but avoided the steeper switchbacks. And like an idiot, I agreed. We turned onto an old hunting trail. It was narrower, less walked. The leaf cover was thicker, and the forest seemed denser. After 20 minutes, the group got quiet. No one said it out loud, but I felt it. Something was wrong. The GPS signal was getting spotty. The trail wasn't clear. One guy stopped to check his bearings, and then we heard a sound behind us. It was faint, just a crack, like a twig snapping. I turned fast, light sweeping through the trees, but saw nothing. Someone said it was probably a deer. I nodded, though I felt my stomach tighten. We kept walking, but slower now. Everyone stopped chatting. The only sound was our feet on dead leaves. Then we heard it again, this time closer. Another twig snapped. Then silence. I turned full circle, scanning the forest. Still nothing. But the hairs on my arms were standing up. The forest was wrong. Too still. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that only happens when something big is moving through and everything else wants to stay out of its way. It wasn't just in my head. I could feel it. We picked up the pace. The trail was nearly invisible now, more of a suggestion than a path. Branches tugged at our sleeves. We ducked through brush. My heart was hammering in my chest. Not just because we were off trail, but because I could feel something watching us. The sound came again, just to the left. Crunch, crunch, then silence. This time I didn't try to find it with my light. I didn't want to see. The group started to break up, people walking faster, trying to pretend it was fine. But you could feel the fear sinking in, spreading like ink in water. One guy stopped to tie his boot, and the rest of us kept walking, thinking he'd catch up. But 5 minutes passed and he didn't. We waited, called out. Nothing. One guy ran back to find him. Came back alone. No sign. No answer. Said he didn't hear anything. Like the guy just vanished. Now we were down to 4. We didn't talk about it. Just started walking faster, more downhill than anything else, pushing through branches and thorns. I scraped my knee on a rock. Didn't stop. Just kept moving. Another snap. This time right behind us. I started to sweat, even in the cold. My headlamp flickered. Battery low. I swapped it with my backup. My breathing was sharp and loud in my ears. Then I saw the tracks. Fresh ones. In the mud by a tree. Big, rounded paws. I'd seen photos of cougar tracks before, these matched. But they weren't deep like something passing by. They were in place. Like whatever it was had been sitting there, watching. I didn't tell the others. I just kept moving. And then I made a mistake. I tripped on a root. It was dumb. I should have seen it. My foot caught, and I went down hard, my headlamp flinging sideways into the brush. My pack slid off my shoulder. Everything hurt. The others didn't see. They were already ahead, maybe 30 or 40 feet. I called out. No response. I called again, still nothing. I grabbed my stuff and stood up. My headlamp was busted. My backup flashlight was weak. Everything beyond 10 feet was shadows. And then I heard breathing. Not mine. Not an animal huff or snort. Just steady breathing, like something was crouched nearby, waiting. I turned slow, sweeping the light. Eyes, 2 eyes, low to the ground, reflecting back the beam. Not human eyes, closer to the ground, unblinking. Then they disappeared. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran downhill, branches slapping me, dirt and leaves flying. I didn't care if I twisted my ankle. I didn't care where I ended up. I just wanted out. After what felt like an hour of running, I hit a ditch, deep and wide. I rolled into it, scraped up and gasping. No sound behind me, nothing chasing. I stayed there until dawn. When the light finally rose, I checked my map. Somehow I'd ended up almost 3 miles south of the trail. I hiked slowly, carefully, back to a service road. A hunter picked me up around noon, took me to town. The others? 2 showed up the next day, bruised and tired. 1 never came back. They searched for days. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers. Nothing. No trace. They said he probably fell, hit his head, wandered off. But I don't believe that, because I remember the breathing. I remember the eyes. I remember the way the forest felt, like we were being herded, watched. Since then, I've never hiked at night. Never. I don't care if it's a full moon or a clear trail, because we may be the smartest animals in the forest, but that doesn't mean we're at the top of the food chain. And now when I see people online talking about hiking in cougar country after dark like it's no big deal, I just shake my head, because I used to be them, and it nearly got me killed. I've always been the kind of person who yelled at characters in horror movies. You know, when they do something stupid like running upstairs instead of out the door, or when they go check out a noise in the dark with no flashlight or weapon. I used to think, how dumb do you have to be to make that choice? I thought I'd stay calm in any situation. I thought fear would sharpen me, not dull me. But that was before I had to fight real fear. Deep, grounding, skin-prickling fear that fogs up your brain like cold breath on a mirror. After what happened to me, I never say things like that anymore. I get why people in movies panic. I get why they make stupid decisions. Because when you're really scared, you don't think straight. You react. And sometimes reacting without thinking nearly gets you killed. I was driving through a stretch of backcountry in the Appalachian foothills. I'd taken a few days off work to go camping alone, something I'd done many times before. I liked being in the woods where no one could bother me. I liked the quiet. I liked waking up with birds instead of alarms and going to bed when the fire died out. I'd picked a spot off a forestry road that wasn't even on most maps anymore. I'd gone there once before, about a year earlier. It was a long dirt road that wound up through the trees, with occasional pull-offs used by hunters or fishermen. One of them led to a tiny clearing just big enough for a tent, and 100 feet down from there was a slow, shallow creek. It was one of those places that felt like it had been forgotten. That day, the weather had turned quickly. The sky was clear when I left home, but 2 hours into the drive, clouds rolled in fast and dark. It was fall, late October, and sudden weather shifts weren't uncommon in those mountains. Rain started just after I passed the last gas station. By the time I hit gravel, it was pouring. Not just steady rain, but sheets of it. Heavy, cold, punishing rain that clung to the windshield and made the road a blur. I slowed down and flipped my wipers to high. The road twisted and dipped unpredictably, and even though I knew where I was going, it didn't feel familiar anymore. I wasn't sure if I'd missed the right turn. Everything looked the same: walls of trees, drenched underbrush, mud streaking the road. My phone had long since lost signal. That's when I saw something dart out of the woods. It was quick, low to the ground. Something with legs, maybe a deer or a dog or just a shadow. It moved across the road in front of me, maybe 50 feet ahead. I jerked the wheel without thinking, and for a second, it felt like everything slowed down. The front tires lost traction. The truck slid sideways. I tried to correct it, but the mud had no grip. The rear end fishtailed. 1 second I was on the road, the next I wasn't. I ran off the side. I crashed through a wall of brush and felt the world tilt. The truck went nose down into a slope and skidded until the undercarriage slammed into a buried rock or stump. I don't know what. The airbag didn't deploy, but the jolt slammed my chest into the wheel. The engine stalled. Everything went quiet except the sound of rain hammering the roof. I sat there for a few seconds, panting, trying to understand what had just happened. I wasn't hurt, at least not badly. My ribs ached, and I had a small cut on my forehead from hitting the visor, but I was okay. Shaken, but okay. The problem was, I wasn't on the road anymore. I climbed out and surveyed the scene. The truck had slid about 30 feet down a slope and come to rest in a shallow depression. The wheels were half sunken in mud, and the nose had buried into soft earth. I tried backing up. No luck. The rear tires just spun. I tried digging them out with my hands. Then, with the little folding shovel I kept in my emergency kit. Still nothing. The mud was too soft, and the rain was only making it worse. I accepted it. I was stuck. There was no way I was getting the truck out without help. No signal, no tow line, no winch. And with the storm picking up, staying in the vehicle wasn't a great option either. If the slope turned into a washout or the creek behind me flooded, I could get trapped or worse. I knew the road was up above, maybe 30 feet. I decided to hike back up, find my bearings, and walk to the nearest town or ranger station. But the road wasn't there. I don't mean I forgot where it was. I mean it was gone. I climbed the slope, weaving around trees and mud-slick rocks. But when I got to the top, there was no road, just more trees, solid forest. I walked east for 15 minutes. Nothing. West for 20. Nothing. I should have hit the road again easily, but it wasn't there. I thought maybe I'd gotten turned around during the slide. Maybe I'd climbed the wrong direction. I dropped a marker at the spot where I thought the truck was and tried again, using the compass clipped to my jacket. Still nothing. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. By then, the rain had slowed, but fog was creeping in. That thick mountain fog that curls low to the ground and swallows everything more than a few feet away. The forest went quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of water dripping from branches. I didn't want to admit I was lost, but I couldn't find the road. I couldn't find my own truck, even with the marker. Somehow, I'd crossed some invisible line, and I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I was panicking, though I wouldn't admit that either. I just started walking. I figured if I kept moving in one direction, I'd eventually hit a road or a cabin or a trail. Something. Anything. I walked for hours. The fog never lifted. Light faded, and shadows stretched between the trees. I saw movement more than once. A flicker to the left, a shape darting across the path, but every time I turned, it was gone. I told myself it was just deer, maybe a fox, maybe a trick of the light. Eventually, I found a hollow in the ground beneath a large oak. It was dry enough to sit under and shielded from the wind. I huddled there, knees to my chest, wrapped in a mylar blanket from my pack. I was cold, soaked, and shaking. That night was the longest of my life. Every noise in the dark felt like it was coming for me. Every snapped twig made my heart seize up. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for long. I just waited for dawn, counting the seconds between sounds. In the morning, I pushed onward. My legs were numb, my fingers stiff. My pack felt heavier with each mile. I rationed water, ate one granola bar, peeled leeches off my ankles. Everything hurt. At some point, I realized I was walking in circles. I passed the same rock outcropping twice, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. I had a compass, I had a map, but I was still circling. That's when the fear really set in. Not the sharp, sudden fear from before. This was slower, deeper, the kind of fear that burrows in and spreads until it's in your teeth, your bones, your heart. I started to feel like I'd never leave those woods, like they'd swallowed me, and I'd stay there, just bones under moss. Another lost hiker with a sad story. But then I saw the ribbon. It was a piece of bright orange flagging tape, tied around a branch ahead of me, the kind forest workers or surveyors use. It was old and faded, but it was not natural. Someone had been here. That meant I was near a marked path. I followed it. Another ribbon appeared 10 minutes later, then another. They led me down a slope, across a stream, and up a ridge. And at the top of that ridge, I saw a road. A real road, paved with a guardrail and everything. I stumbled out onto the shoulder just as a pickup was coming around the bend. The driver hit the brakes and jumped out, looking at me like I was a ghost. I must have looked rough, mud-caked, bleeding, wide-eyed. He didn't ask questions, just gave me water and drove me to the nearest ranger station. I was 14 miles from where I'd started. 14 miles, and I'd somehow ended up circling myself in a pocket of woods I thought I knew. They sent a crew out to find my truck. Took them 3 days. The location I gave didn't match up with anything on the maps. They only found it because of the drone the ranger used. When they did, they said the road had suffered a small landslide and the area was unstable. That might have explained why I couldn't find my way back. But not everything. Not the way the trees felt like they were watching. Not the shapes in the fog. Not the fact that I wasn't thinking straight the whole time. I was functioning on instinct. My decisions made no sense. And now, when I watch horror movies and someone runs off screaming in the wrong direction, I don't roll my eyes anymore. I get it. Because when I panicked, when I was really afraid, I didn't act smart. I didn't stay calm. I ran off the road. I lost the path. I went in circles. I almost didn't make it out. And every time I think back to that moment, or if I had run off the side of the road just a little faster, just a little earlier, I realize how thin the line was between getting home and never being found. Now, when people panic in the woods, I don't judge. I was one bad decision away from being one of them. I haven't told many people what happened that summer. Only 1 or 2 close friends ever heard the whole thing, and even then I left parts out because I didn't want them to look at me like I was crazy. But after seeing people online asking, "Was this in 2012 in Washington?" I knew someone else had seen something out there. So yeah, I'll say it now. Yes, it was 2012. Yes, it was in Washington. And I know exactly what you're talking about. It was August. I had just turned 24, and I'd gotten a break between jobs. I'd been working part-time at an outdoor gear shop in Olympia. We were closing for renovations, and I had 2 weeks free. I didn't have much money, but I had gear and I had time. I loved solo hikes back then. Real deep in the trees stuff. I'd gone camping with my dad since I was a kid, and by the time I hit my 20s, I could spend days out on my own. I always packed light, stuck to what I knew, brought topo maps and backups, and didn't take stupid risks. I liked pushing a little further off the trail each time, but never enough to make it a rescue mission. I wasn't cocky, just confident. I'd heard about a stretch of forest east of Mount Rainier, between Greenwater and Cliff Dell. That was supposed to be beautiful and remote. Less traveled than the national park side, more rugged. No major trails. logging roads and old fire access roads. Perfect. I studied the area on topo maps for days, found some Forest Service roads that were still drivable, and planned a 3-night trip that would take me in a wide loop and spit me back out about 10 miles from where I parked. I brought my pack, bivy tent, freeze-dried meals, and enough supplies to last 5 days in case I got delayed. No cell reception out there, obviously, so I left a note with my roommate and marked a wide circle on a map. I told him if I wasn't back by the 5th day, he should call for help. I drove out early the first day. It took about 2 hours of winding through Forest Service roads until I found a spot wide enough to pull off and park. It was nothing official, just a gravel clearing near the mouth of an overgrown ATV trail. I locked up, left a note on the dash just in case, and started walking. The first day was amazing. The trail was soft but still visible, mostly from dirt bikes and hunters. I followed it about 6 miles in, then veered off toward a dry creek I'd seen on the map. I figured I'd make camp near there. I didn't see another person all day. No boot prints, no wrappers, nothing. Just birds, wind, and the occasional crack of dead branches under my boots. I set up camp on a patch of flat ground near the creek, laid out my bivy sack, made a small fire with dry stuff I collected, and had a hot meal. Then I sat back against a log and listened to the forest settle down as the sun disappeared. I loved that part, when the woods go totally still and it's just you and the air and whatever rustling comes from the trees far off. I fell asleep around 10. The second day I hiked northeast. I followed the creek for a while, then cut uphill where the trees thinned out. My plan was to follow the ridgeline north for a few miles and start looping back on the third day. That was when I started seeing things I didn't expect. First was the trash. It wasn't normal trash like candy wrappers or bottles. It was older, rusted cans, bits of cloth, and not in piles but scattered, like someone had camped out a long time ago and left it behind. At first, I figured it was from old logging crews, but it didn't look like that kind of gear. It looked more like survival junk, homemade stuff, a rusted-out tin pot, a broken hacksaw, half-melted rubber boots with duct tape holding them together. All of it looked like it had been out there for years, maybe decades. I kept hiking. The second thing was the wire, barbed wire to be exact. Just a single line of it stretched between 2 trees, not a fence, just there, hanging at knee height, rusty and slack. And it wasn't part of a longer stretch. I looked both ways and couldn't find any more. Just this weird single line like someone had tied it up to catch animals or people walking through. I stepped over it carefully and moved on. Then I saw the birds, or more accurately, what was left of them. 2 of them, both jays, I think, hung by the neck with fishing line. One from a branch, the other from a low shrub. Both stripped of feathers down the back like something started skinning them and then stopped. That's when I really felt it. The change. The woods got quiet. Not evening quiet. Not storm coming quiet. But wrong quiet. Like the trees didn't want to say anything. I didn't say anything either. I just kept walking. Around mid-afternoon, I came across something I still can't explain right. It was a tarp. Not a full one, just half of it. A blue one, sun-bleached almost white, partially buried under pine needles. I pulled it back and found a pit underneath. Not natural, dug, maybe 2 feet deep, lined with plastic bags. Inside were bones, small ones, way too small to be deer or elk. I dropped the tarp and backed away. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a GPS, just my compass and the map. I'd marked my route, but I hadn't been exact. There were no real trails. I was just following topography and estimating distances. If I got turned around, it could take me days to get out. So I didn't go back the way I came. I kept heading toward my original loop, thinking I'd push through and swing wide to avoid whatever this was. I made camp in a dense grove that night. No fire. I didn't want anyone seeing smoke. I barely ate. I just crawled into my bivy sack, kept my knife in my hand, and listened. I didn't sleep. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Not animals. I know what those sound like. These were steady, 2-legged, slow. They stopped maybe 20 yards from where I was laying. Then I heard something else. Metal. like a can being crushed or dragged. Then nothing. I stayed perfectly still until dawn. When the light came, I didn't pack up my gear. I just grabbed my bag and moved, left the rest behind. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I changed my route, cut due south, figured I'd hit the road eventually. But around noon, I came across something that made my stomach twist. It was a trail camera, one of those hunting cameras strapped to a tree with a motion sensor. But this one was pointed right at the trail I was walking. Not a game trail, a human one, worn just enough for feet. No fresh tracks, but definitely not wild animal paths. And the camera was newer, not rusted or weathered, maybe weeks old. I walked past it like I didn't see it, but I knew then that someone else was out there, watching, and they weren't hiding all that hard. An hour later, I found a shelter. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't a tent. It wasn't a cabin. It was a dugout, a shallow hole in the hillside covered in logs and sticks and packed with moss and leaves. There was a black plastic tarp stretched over the top, and inside were empty cans, a bedroll, and what looked like a pile of clothes or rags. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, faster now. But the thing is, I wasn't sure I was walking out anymore. I wasn't tracking direction. I was reacting, ducking under branches, pushing through thick brush. I fell once badly, caught my ankle on a root and hit the ground hard, cut my hands, bruised my ribs. I got up and limped, but the pain slowed me down. I started hearing things again around branches snapping, once what sounded like coughing. I stopped and listened, but it never repeated. Just that one sharp exhale and then silence. At some point, I passed another trail camera, then another. 3 total, all pointed down different narrow paths, all strung with wire or rope. Not tripwires exactly, just things to mark motion. This wasn't a hunter's setup. This was a perimeter. That's when I made a choice. I left the pack behind. It was weighing me down, and I knew now that I was close to something bad. I took only my knife, a bottle of water, and the map folded into my back pocket. I moved downhill. I knew the terrain had been rising for most of the day, and now I used gravity to guide me. Every step was pain, but I forced it. Every time I thought about stopping, I remembered the coughing, the fish line, the birds, the bones. I reached a dry gulch around 6 p.m. and followed it. I think that's what saved me, because half an hour later, I heard an engine, a real one. I climbed up the side of the gulch and saw a pickup truck idling on a dirt road maybe 100 yards away. A guy in a hard hat and vest was working on some kind of drainage marker. I don't even remember running to him. I just remember collapsing against the truck and hearing him say, "Whoa, buddy." He drove me 10 miles to a ranger station. I told them I got lost and hurt my ankle. That's it. I didn't want to answer questions. I didn't want to go back. I still don't. I never reported what I found. I knew what would happen. They'd search and find nothing, or they'd find something and cover it up. Either way, I didn't want any part of it. I've read the threads since then. People asking, was